Did you ever think you'd be a leader at a billion-dollar organization?
Not at all. So my path has gone in a completely different direction.
Hundreds of almost over 1,000 people that I've spoken to, some people are their LinkedIn is okay, but that's a really small subset. Most people don't use it a lot.
I love LinkedIn. It's my favorite platform to look for jobs, but I usually don't apply. But I'll tell you my actual strategy of what I use to get jobs.
They always wonder, how do I do it? You have a certification, but it's not in tech, it's in pharmaceuticals.
Yes, because we live in an era where there's so much information at our fingertips. You know, my children have access to things that I didn't have access to until maybe I was 25.
Doing the thing and failing, it's actually a trait of something. It's indicative of something much, much bigger.
If you would have asked me when I was 17, even 18, even 19, what I was going to be, it was going to be the next Usher. You know, I was that guy who loved music. I had a studio at the house.
Sean, man, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. How are you feeling?
Man, it's a pleasure. For one, thank you. You know, I'm always excited to meet like-minded individuals, but those who are helping others. At the end of the day, we get it mixed up. We think generational wealth is money. It's not, it's knowledge. So I love the fact that we are helping that next generation get the knowledge they need.
It's a pleasure and an honor also getting that feedback from you as well. One of the great things that I feel validates our team on this journey is people such as yourself who look at what we're doing and say, hey, you guys are doing the right thing. And so it's one thing to carry the torch. It's another thing to make sure the torch doesn't go out. And so on this marathon, you know, we're trying to keep that fire going. So for folks who don't know, Sean, what do you do right now? What is your day job?
Yes, my day job, I work for a company called Dutchy. So we are the largest technology provider for the cannabis industry. So when you think about companies like DoorDash for delivery, like Shopify for building websites, like Square for taking payments and processing the point of sale system, even insurance, we do that and we have the vast majority of the market share. So we're valued at a couple $2 billion, but we're still a relatively small company. We're still at about under 600 employees. And my organization is pretty much about 20% of the company. So my team, we lead customer support, and it's ultimately identifying how we can be the voice of the company and solve problems. I have a team of specialists under me, also engineers, analysts, managers, leaders, you name it. Our job is just to make sure that we're solving the customer's problems.
That's amazing. Did you ever think you'd be a leader at a billion-dollar organization?
Not at all. So my path has gone in a completely different direction. If you would have asked me when I was 17, even 18, even 19, what I was going to be, it was going to be the next Usher. You know, I was that guy who loved music. I had a studio at the house. I danced my whole life. The problem was I couldn't sing that good, but at the end of the day, my vision for my life was just so different. But I do feel like I'm doing the exact same thing today. I feel as if my passion has just taken a new shape, but it's still the same exact mission.
And what's that mission?
Yeah, my mission is to make sure that I'm making life easier for others. You know, I think when we talk a little bit more about my journey, you'll see that I didn't have that easy path. So I'm highly obsessed with how do I make it easier for the next person. And then even as, let's say, being an artist, when I was being creative, it wasn't necessarily the music or the performance that I loved. What I really loved was the fact that I could be creative, create something out of nothing. I love the fact that I could perform, whether it was speaking in front of other people or you put stats on the board. Can I outperform myself? But then I also love that you're only as good as your last hit. So it's that constant reiteration, that constant reinvention of yourself. So to me, that applies to anything. It can apply to business as well. I just didn't see this for myself, but I'm grateful.
So you talked about that mission. Have you kept that through line? And let's actually go back into the journey, because you said if we look at it, we'll see that it wasn't always clear. So can you talk a bit about, I guess, your background for people who don't know you? I mean, who was Sean before the accolades, before leading billion-dollar organizations? Who's Sean Ellenry?
Yeah, you know, I was this first generation American. My parents are Nigerian. So shout out to anybody from the diaspora. But, you know, being born here, I had an opportunity to experience different cultures. I moved around a lot, went to over 12 different schools. So I had that experience of being in a highly multiracial school, or all white school, or mostly Black school, in Florida and Georgia, just got that opportunity to see different cultures and how we can interact. So my background was very much it was a melting pot. I can't point to one place and say it was home because I had so many versions of home. But when I got to high school, I messed up really bad my ninth grade year. My ninth grade year was that year where even though I was the highly intelligent kid, I was very good at passing tests. You put classwork in front of me or homework in front of me, I don't want to get it done. To me, once I learned something, I want to move on. So I didn't understand how I processed information back then. I processed really fast, but no one ever taught me that. So it was more so, hey, you still have to do this other work. But really my ninth grade year, my mother gets sick. She's diagnosed with kidney failure, and our family separates to multiple different homes. And we're trying to figure things out. And I fall into a spell of depression. I'm fighting in school. I'm doing things I shouldn't be doing. And I passed 2 classes my ninth grade year. And one of them was chorus. And so it was just one of those years where I was behind. So fast forward, I do very well throughout the rest of high school, but I'm constantly working to catch up with my credits. I end up going to night school. I go to alternative school just to make sure I can catch up. And I ended up not doing it. I ended up missing the mark by a couple of credits. And I had a counselor pull me aside and she said, you could go straight to college right now. You have the aptitude for it. How about you just get your GED and go straight to college? And I was like, well, no one told me that. I wish you would have told me that 2 years ago when I was stressing out about all of this. So I committed to doing it. I ended up leaving school and I did not get my GED immediately. I instead try to get a job. I'm out in the streets trying to figure it out. And I find myself living in my car. At this moment, my mom's house was going into foreclosure because she was sick. So she ended up having to sell it, thank God, last minute. She goes to live with my best friend in their attic, and everything that I owned was in the back of my car. So I'm sleeping on friends' floors, sleeping in alleys, wherever I can do, but I didn't want to let anybody know I didn't have a place to go. I kind of kept it to myself for a long time. And when you're in that place, I remember my mom was dating a guy at the time, and he was like, your son's going to end up dead or in jail. And if you know anything about the Nigerian culture, we take education very seriously. And we take, putting our kids on a pedestal very seriously. It's like, look what my child is doing. My child's at UGA, mine's at Georgia Tech, mine's at Harvard. What is your child doing? So I knew I was a disappointment to my family. And at this point, to your point, you said it earlier, it's all about belief. Had I chosen to believe that what they said about me was correct, I wouldn't have made it out of that situation, because less than 10 years later, I was a vice president at a company here in Atlanta. And I say that to say that wherever you start off, you ultimately decide whether or not you're going to progress past that or not. But it all comes down to what are you saying to yourself. Whether people say this doesn't really matter because they don't have to actually live your life. So for me, there's a long journey between that, but it just came down to understanding the key principles of, if you want to succeed, what are you willing to trade? What are you willing to sacrifice? And I had to let the old version of me die.
Talk more about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, I was that typical teenager, obsessed with music, right? So my passion is highly creative, but I wasn't disciplined, I wasn't organized, and I was a procrastinator. So when a couple years later, I started getting my life back on my feet, and I ended up finishing up, got my GED, enrolled into school, and I'm gonna meet my wife shortly later. And I'm 21 at this point. She's 18. We've been together for 2 months and she's pregnant. And at this point, it's like, okay, I just started getting my life back on my feet. Now I'm about to be a father with a woman that I don't even know that well. And it came down to, you have one or two options. You can either run away from your responsibilities or you can lean into them. And I chose to lean into them. So it became, okay, how do I make sure I can multiply and magnify my skill set so that I'm an asset to my family and not a liability? And one of those things I learned was that over that 10-year period, or really 9-year period, it was that there were 3 key lessons I had to be mindful of. Whatever I did in my career, it had to tell a story. Because unfortunately, a lot of the times I saw a lot of my friends, would start one career and reset and start from zero. And they weren't finding a way to tie their careers together. And if you know anything about growth in your career, it's all about experience. So I knew that I had to make sure that I was stacking my experience. And if I go to a new vertical, how can I take my experience with me? 2, I knew that it was all about study ethic. You mentioned it earlier. I think work ethic was very important in my parents' generation. And it's still important today, but what trumps it is study ethic, because we live in an era where there's so much information at our fingertips. You know, my children have access to things that I didn't have access to until maybe I was 25. So with all this information, how do we constantly feed and study and fulfill our gaps and educate ourselves in the right areas so that we can be actionable and be successful? But number one was risk taking. You know, I bet on myself. Yeah, I ended up joining organizations that needed to be turned around, where they said, hey, this team's a little rough. Can you come in here? They're not performing well. Can you make them perform? I moved out of the country to build teams. You know, I've led teams outside of the country. Or I've built things from scratch. I'm not afraid to go to a startup environment. So really those three principles taught me, okay, if I can make sure my career tells a story, I can apply study ethic to what I do, but then I can also be willing to take risks and bet on myself, I'll become an asset to anybody. So it just taught me a serious level of discipline that's kept me successful along the years.
Right. And so some of these lessons you pointed out are actually in the book that you wrote
Yeah.
around standing out on LinkedIn. And out of the hundreds of almost over 1,000 people that I've spoken to, some people their LinkedIn is okay, but that's a really small subset. Most people don't use it a lot.
Yeah.
What's the importance of using LinkedIn in one's career journey?
Oh, you know, I'm so glad you asked me this. Whenever I poll rooms, you know, I've had the opportunity to speak so many places, and this is a big topic. To your point, if you were to poll 1,000 people and ask how many of you have a LinkedIn profile, 90% of them will raise their hand. If you would then ask how many have a LinkedIn profile that's up to date, 60 to 70% will raise their hand. But as soon as you ask them how many of you have a LinkedIn that you've actually updated or posted something within the last week, 5% would raise their hand. And the reason why is because we almost are intimidated to present ourselves online. You know, can I actually say my thoughts, and can I actually talk about what I know in my experience? And I think it's so important that we lean into LinkedIn. The reason why is you can own your professional brand. For the first time in history, you as an employee can actually brand and market yourself. If you looked at 15, 20 years ago, the only way a company knew about your performance is if they called your recommendations or reach out to your former employers. Now you can actually put your voice out there. So what I love about LinkedIn is that you can be a thought leader. You can put thought leader and content out there and say, hey, here's what I know about my industry. Then you can also share your adventures. It does so well when you show, hey, I went to this event. I networked with this person. I was at this summit. I spoke on this stage. And then also you can get personal. You can talk about your personal life. Look at my dog, look at my family, look at my friends. And it allows you to be a complete human, because I call it the Shark Tank effect. If you look at what Shark Tank did to the consumers in America, especially coming out of the pandemic, people invest in companies where they know the person's story. So I want to spend money with you if I know that you created this product because your child had skin cancer and this was what helped them. Now I'm more invested in it. So it's the same thing with you as a professional. Think of yourself as a business. You Inc., you are the corporation. So if you're going to pitch yourself, you want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward, but also who buys a great product that's never been marketed? You could have the best product in the world. If it's not being marketed, no one's going to go after it. So I love that LinkedIn allows you to be that thought leader, but it also allows for companies to see you. They see your billboard and they can come and be attracted to you and say, I want you on my team. And you don't have to necessarily know everything. People like to follow someone who maybe doesn't know as much, but is on their journey learning the next steps.
Mhm. Has it benefited you? You wrote a book on it, so I'm assuming this has had some kind of effect in your career. What's LinkedIn done for Sean?
Absolutely. You know, to be honest, I haven't applied for a job in a long time. The last couple of jobs I got were recruited off of LinkedIn, or because of a relationship that I built on LinkedIn. And it's opened so many doors for me. And I had the opportunity to start speaking on more stages and being on podcasts because I've been more vocal. So that's superficial stuff. You'll get more job offers. You'll get people who maybe even want coaching and services from you. And that's great. What I really love about LinkedIn is that it's allowed me to reach out to that person who is just like me. If you went on my LinkedIn, let's say 2-3 years ago, you wouldn't have seen that I was a homeless high school dropout. But in recent years, I've gotten more vulnerable because I realized I may not be here tomorrow. So if I'm not going to be here, how do I make sure I'm leaving my best foot forward? And the way I can do that is to find the young woman, the young man who's just like me, who may have had a setback in their adult life early or late and be able to say, if I can be here, you can be here too. So I really look at LinkedIn as it's also your way to reach out to that person who needs to hear your voice and know that you can be an example of who they can become.
That's awesome. So most people who come to symposia are early in their career or they're early in a career pivot. Talk to tons of people who may be a decade or more into their current career and say, "Hey, I want to switch." Maybe they're new to LinkedIn. How does someone who's not speaking on stages across the world also use LinkedIn?
Yeah, so it can actually be an advantage with you being early in what you're doing. And here's why. Um, as a thought leader, when you're posting thought leader content, you're really taking, here's what you know about the industry, here's what you learned about the industry, and here's how you interpret it. So when you're posting that content, you may say, well, I'm a rookie, I'm still in a course, or I'm still in a program right now. Who am I to post? Well, what I learned is that it can be a big advantage when you're early on, because I'll give an example. If you know anything about real estate, there's something called wholesaling. One of the top voices, influencers in wholesaling, his name is Max Maxwell. And when he first started posting less than 10 years ago, posting videos on YouTube, he had a big following. He had meetups. He didn't do any courses. It was all about how do I connect people. And he had a lot of clout. Yet he was only in the game for a few months. Whereas his mentor who guided him had been doing it for 30 years, and he was doing tens of millions of dollars in real estate deals. And his mentor sat back and said, I don't get it. How do I show up to an event and Max has 300 people in this room and he doesn't know anything? But me, I've been doing it for 30 years and nobody's necessarily trying to have a conversation with me. And what I always say is that when you're new at something, that's the time that people will lean into more of what you have to say, because you're only 1 or 2 steps ahead of them. So I can relate more to where you are than, let's say, somebody who's 100 steps ahead of me. So don't be afraid to say, hey, I'm still in this course right now. Should I be talking about it? Absolutely. Talk about why you're excited about it. Talk about how it ties into the career you're doing today, or how you can actually see in your industry how important cybersecurity is. So I absolutely believe, even if you're early on or in a new career, you can go ahead and start posting.
Yeah. This funny fact, there's actually a few students and symposia who've gotten jobs, and the recruiters have cited their LinkedIn content as the reason why they reached out. So hey, don't underestimate it. Mr. Beast is onto something, y'all. Post content.
Post content, absolutely.
So let's dial it back to the early side of your career. I want to go through what you've been doing over the last 10 years. Let's go over the first 10 years of your career. What were you doing? Like, so you're in your car out of high school trying to figure it out. What happens next? What experience were you building at that time?
So going back, I ended up finding myself in retail. And a hack that I learned for any young man out there who can't find a job, work at a female's retail store. They will hire you quickly because they always need somebody to break down some boxes that came out of stock. And then of course, if you like being around ladies, it's also a bonus. But really, that was when I started getting myself back on my feet, was just getting retail jobs. And at one point, I went to stay with my father and my siblings at my stepmother's house, sleep on the couch, really got myself together there, working a job. And then eventually my mother got back on her feet and I moved in with her. But at the time that I moved in with her, I had to let my car go. So the reason why is that it couldn't pass emissions. And I was collecting so many tickets across every county. So if you're not aware of it, if you're in a state that doesn't have emissions testing, essentially, if you can't pass emissions, you can't get your tag, which means you're driving around without registration and you can be cited for it. And if you don't show up to court, you will get arrested for it. So I'm at a point now where I'm walking to work. So I have a car that I can't use and I'm walking to the mall, and I ended up taking 2 different jobs there. So I'm working at, I think it was Charlotte Russe, which is one of the stores. And then I would go upstairs to Finish Line. So I'm selling women's clothes and I'm selling shoes. And then I took a 3rd job and I was working at Walgreens. And at this point I could get back on my feet. But that Walgreens job opened a lot of doors for me, because when I was working there, my first day on the job, my store manager, he asked me, let's go to the stock room. And he makes me get up on a ladder. I'm 50 feet in the air and he's handing metal shelves to me. And we're stacking them up 12 feet high all day long. And at the end of the day, when we wrapped up, he said, I've never met anybody who'd be willing to do something like this. I like your work ethic. Stick with me. I got you. So he ended up giving me more hours. So I was able to quit my other 2 jobs and work there full time. But eventually the pharmacy manager caught my attention. I caught her attention. She was a pharmacist and she's like, "You're too intelligent to be working here. What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just trying to make ends meet, move forward." And she said, "I'm going to see if I can promote you to the pharmacy." Now, if you don't know, typically it takes a couple years of you working at Walgreens for you can get promoted to the pharmacy. So because the store manager believed in me, she believed in me, I ended up passing the certification exam and I began working in the pharmacy. And I thought I would love it. I thought I was going to go to school and be a pharmacist. I promised her I'd go back to school, so I enrolled in school, and I hated that job. I felt like I still worked at McDonald's, but the customers were great, patients were great. It's just I knew it wasn't for me. It didn't allow me to think enough. Pharmacists, I saw them as individuals who got to just really sit down and read off the screen, and that's about it. It was kind of very transactional. So I said I wanted more. And a family friend of mine, Uncle Ephraim, he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I work for a company called ACS, which is now Xerox, and we actually hire pharmacy technicians for their contact center." I was like, "What is a contact center?" And he said, "Well, basically you sit down all day and pharmacists will call in for prior authorization and approval for the state of Texas Medicaid." I said, "Wait, I get to sit down all day?" Like my entire career I had been on my feet at this point. So I'm like, I'm sold. It paid me $5 an hour more, and I thought I was the man. So I take this job, and it got me into this new space of, okay, now I'm more on the contact center side. And then I evolved from there and went on like the technical support side and pharmaceutical support side. And I remember one year, about 3 years into doing this work for multiple companies. And maybe it's my 4th year. And as I'm working for this company, I fall in love or found a website called TechCrunch. So if you know what TechCrunch is, it's all about tech companies. And they had something called TechCrunch TV. And I loved they had something called TechCrunch TV, and they had a show called TechCrunch Cribs. So they would go to different tech offices and show you what it's like working in Silicon Valley. And I got obsessed with it. I was like, this is where I want to be. I know this is the type of career I want. Then I wanted to start my own startup. So I started a dating website. Then we eventually started a social network and got tapped into tech companies around. And neither one of them did well, but I learned some new skills. I learned how to, do a little bit of code. I learned how to do websites. I learned how to market and build demand. But I'm still working that same day job. And as I'm working that job as a pharmaceutical support rep, I ended up getting fired, and I deserved it. I wasn't showing up to work on time, and it caught up with me one day. So as I get fired, I get terminated. I now have a different mindset where I'm freaking out because at this point, my mother's living with me. My grandmother's living with me. My wife, which was my fiance at the time, we have a young son who's maybe 2 years old at this point. And to have to go home and tell that person I lost my job, it shook me because I knew better than that. I could have done better. And when more than half your income is gone, you got to figure it out. And my wife held me down. She didn't kick me while I was down. She gave me an opportunity to really pick myself up. And I went out interviewing and applying for a lot of jobs, but I then had another family friend who said, "Hey, you should come work for us. We're hiring analysts, real-time analysts." I'm like, "What's a real-time analyst?" And I interviewed for the job. It's an hour and a half from my house, but I take it. I said, it's worth it. It was the most amount of money I had ever made in my life, $32,000 a year. So I'm feeling like I'm the man. But really that started me on a path to get to leadership because within my first 4 months of working this new role as an analyst, my vice president leaves the company, but he brings my supervisor with him. And I'm freaking out because my peers are in Utah. So I'm like, it makes sense, with me being in this office, they should eventually get rid of me or lay me off. And we don't have a leader. So I decided to step up. I said, you can either go out complaining or you can step up and say, turn it around and be in charge. So I just raised my hand and said, I'm the senior analyst. I'm the newest guy on the team, but now I'm leading the team. And we're working 6 days a week. I was working by myself on Sundays, opening Mondays, closing Mondays. And really, me and those two guys, we held it down for about a year before they promoted me to supervisor. And then about a year later, I got an opportunity to build my team in Mexico. So I relocated out of the country and built a team in Mexico. And my leader at the time, she said, when you move out of the country and build a team, your resume will never be the same. And she was right, because from there, I became a global manager and moved back to the US and realized I was at this company for 5 years, but it's time for me to move on. And I took my first direct role in Atlanta and finally made 6 figures. So I went from being fired to less than 5 years later, making 6 figures. And that was a lesson that I needed to learn.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things in there that really stand out. Two is around the main thing I'm looking at is just your initiative. It's your mindset. I keep coming back to this for folks. They always wonder, how do I do it? You have a certification, but it's not in tech. It's in pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
Everything you've done from starting two failed startups, which is really interesting because doing the thing and failing, it's actually a trait of something. It's indicative of something much, much bigger.
Mm,
To tell folks, if you want to build a skill, I think you exemplify this perfectly. The studying itself isn't going to do it.
yeah.
I think building something on the way to it, you will accumulate the skills required to build that thing. So you acquired skills building, and then you just had the audacity as the new guy to say, "Hey, it's me," because you weren't trying to get. What gave you the confidence to even do that? Why did you even say like, "Hey," what made you stand up? Because that was the point that changed your career. We're just saying, "Hey, I'll do it."
You're spot on because I had in my life, I had never applied for a leadership role ever. In my personal life, I had always been viewed as a leader whether it was with my family or friends, but I never saw myself at work becoming a supervisor one day. It was more so I knew if when you see responsibility, and I think the best thing that happened to me was getting fired. So it was like less than 6 months from that experience of not having something. So there was a desperation to say I can either cradle and fall or crumble and fall, or I can hunker down and say somebody has to step up and do this. And through this process, there was no complaining. I wasn't complaining to anybody about the fact that we didn't have a leader, that I was working 6 days a week. It was just almost like, let's just be quiet, keep our heads down, get it done. Because I knew that it wasn't about me anymore. It was way bigger than me. It was about my family that I was helping take care of. But then it was also about my team because it wasn't just me disenfranchised. My guys in Utah also felt lost. Like, wait a minute, our leadership is gone and we're like the stepchild of the company. And I think by having that servant leadership mindset of knowing I'm here to serve others first, and as a direct impact of me serving them, then I'll get the benefit. I think that helped me along the way. And we actually turned it around so much to the point where we ended up generating so much revenue that our client can continue to give us the most revenue, where even the CEO of the company knew who I was and who my team was, because no one expected us to come and start making millions of dollars for the company. But it was just grit and understanding that when something's bigger than you, you have to have enough belief to say, I'm willing to step up and do something.
Right. Were you qualified for the job when you applied, technically, or raised your hand?
No, not at all. Not at all. But I learned on the job. And that, even I'll even take it a little bit of a step forward. The most scared I've ever been in my career was my first director job. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't that scared when I was a senior analyst because I kind of knew it was a level of responsibility that I just had to hunker down and do. But becoming a director, I felt like it was bigger than me. I felt like I wasn't ready yet. And I was about 28 at the time. So remember, I was 19, dropout and homeless. Now I'm 28 and I'm a director and I don't have my degree. And all of my peers were at least 20 years older than me, and they definitely were not my color. So there was a big level of insecurity. And I think a lot of times we don't want to admit when we're insecure. I was extremely insecure. And I found myself in a position where I said the only way I can make it past this, because I didn't have any mentors in my life, was that I needed to create those virtual mentors. So every single morning before work, I do my devotional, read the Bible, do my devotional, but then I'm listening to podcasts and leadership topics and fireside chats and interviews all day, just digesting, because I knew that once work started, I was going to spend 10 hours supporting my team and leaning in to help my team. I had to feed myself first. So as I was listening to this leadership content every morning, and it was all practical and actionable. If I knew I had to have a tough conversation with someone that day, I would listen to tough subjects about how do you have tough coaching conversations. So essentially, it was helping build me up along the way and build my confidence up. But I knew that I couldn't do it on my own. So even though I didn't have that real life mentor, I found my virtual mentors.
Mhm. Joe, you mentioned that this has been one of those things that kind of fed you as you developed, right? And as you grew. What would it have been like to have an intentional group of mentors around you during this time of transition?
Speed. The thing about mentors, what makes you great is they can help you understand pace. And I know that sounds unusual, but here's what I'll say. Here's what I mean by that. If you think about Michael Jordan, if you know anything about Michael Jordan in the 80s, you'll know that his stats were insane. I think he averaged like 37 one season, where Michael Jordan as an individual player would dominate everybody. He would have in every statistical category. When he played point guard, he was one of the greatest point guards to ever play. He only did it for 11 games, but that's what his skill set could do. When he got the right coach in front of him that let him know, I need you to pull back and pace yourself in these areas to allow your team to come in and help you in these areas where as a collective, you can be stronger. That's when he really found his greatness, because it wasn't about just scoring. It became more of a complete game and a team game. So when you have a strong group of mentors around you, they're going to let you know where you're great, but they're also going to give you the right path to take. You know, when I pray, I don't pray and ask God for anything except for wisdom. I want wisdom and discernment. I want to be able to see the right step to take next. And that's essentially what mentors do for you. And a lot of times we as employees, we confuse the responsibility of our leader and our mentors. Our leaders typically, 70% of the time, they're going to be focused on your performance, how it ties back to their department and company goals. And 30% is going to be about guiding you. Your mentors, 100% of the time, is going to be focused on guiding you. They don't care about your department goals. They just care about how to make you the best version of yourself. So it's great to have a leader. Don't depend on your leader to have that guidance for you. Depend on a mentor and go out there and find those mentors to do that for you.
Wow, that's so powerful, man. Now, in accelerating and with speed, you've taken a lot of risks, and we're gonna sort of wrap up this conversation with the risks, but also you've kind of done a lot of these things without permission. A lot of what I'm seeing people talk about now, especially in the calls that we have with newer members at Symposia, are what certifications do I need, or I don't have a degree. Some of this imposter syndrome and like preparation. So here you are as a VP, and we love certifications. Don't get me wrong, but
Wow.
but where you are now, what's your perspective on some of these paper credentials versus those hard-earned ones?
Yeah, I'm biased, and I hate to say it, I'm biased. Um, I look at it in three different buckets, right? You have the four-year degree programs, which I believe makes sense for people who are going into a career like the medical field or going into law, or people who are really good students, people who do very well in that environment and they're more academic. And it's great. But the thing about the tech world is constantly changing. Every year, something new comes out, especially if you're talking about cybersecurity. Every year, there's a new threat. So unfortunately, four-year degree programs can't keep up with the pace of that. Then you have the certification, and these are for people who I believe are more action-oriented. These are individuals who want to learn something and really hone in and focus on, I want to be able to learn and master this skill as quickly as possible so I can put it into practice. And I'm not necessarily worried about being focused on being a student and getting great grades. I want to be able to be a professional and be able to make money. So it just depends on your mindset. And that third bracket are the individuals who are place themselves in environments where they say, I'm going to build the plane while it's flying. I'm going to build my parachute while I'm crashing down. And that's a different environment, because now you're saying, I need to know this information tomorrow. So what am I going to do? What tools am I going to access to make sure I can fulfill those gaps? So I love telling people, for example, if you know you want to go into marketing and you know nothing about the marketing industry, immediately start reading books, start listening to fireside chats, interviews, podcasts about the marketing industry. And what you'll end up finding out is that the more you digest this content, especially what articles are out there, you'll be able to walk into job interviews, never having done the job, but being able to talk just like them. You'll have the same lingo. You'll understand the direction of the industry and where it's going because it's at the top of your minds. It's the same thing with leadership. It's the same thing with anything. It's what you're willing to invest in. So if you continuously watch reality TV shows, you start noticing you like more drama in your life, right? You attract what you absorb. So I really believe in, how do you curate your life? How do you curate what you're allowing and what content you're allowing to come into you? Because that's what's going to tell you who you are. And the best way to know that is to look at your YouTube algorithm. What is it telling you that you're looking at the most? What is it constantly feeding you? So if you're seeing that it's not feeding you the things that you need to learn to be successful, then you know you got to switch up kind of your habits and behaviors.
Mhm. Nice. Now, what's your perspective on risk taking? On this story, I'm hearing a lot of risk, maybe even some don't try this at home, but it turned out all right. What's your perspective on taking the right risks?
You know, especially for, and I hate to say it like this, I mentor a lot of people. And I think the biggest challenge I see between women and people of color is that we become a little bit risk averse. And and risk isn't just saying, I'm going to go join this company. Like I'm going to go join Peloton right now. When Peloton stock is going down, I have a feeling that if I join there now, maybe I can be a part of the turnaround and get the upside and the benefit. That's risk, but that's not always just risk. Risk could also be, I'm going to do the job of the role ahead of me without being paid for it. So when I tell you that I was a senior analyst, I don't tell you I didn't get paid for being a senior analyst. I don't tell you that when I got promoted to manager and global manager, I still had the same salary I had when I was a supervisor, you know? And the reason being is that you have to understand, when is what I'm doing actually paid university versus it being work? Because sometimes the risk is saying, I'm willing to be an incubator for myself right now. I'm going to take on as much responsibility and do things outside of the scope of my job right now in this environment, so that when I go to the market, I can command more. And I genuinely, over a 10-year period, my salary doubled almost every 2 years. So, and it's not because I did anything special. It's because I was willing to sacrifice in those moments and absorb as much knowledge as possible in that period. And it's the same thing if you do laundry. If you've seen laundry before, you'll see some really big laundry bottles and you'll see some small ones. The large laundry bottle may say 20 loads. It can do 20 loads of laundry. And the small one will say it can do 40. And the difference is concentration. So we always think experience is time. Experience is not time. It's the time. It's the experience within that time that you've done. So how much can you concentrate? So I truly believe take risk and stack by taking more opportunities and not being afraid to step up, even if you're not being compensated at the moment.
That's amazing, man. I'm looking at my Tide Pods over here. Look at the concentration on them. Yeah, but what's the most important thing someone can do to accelerate their career?
The most important thing you can do to accelerate your career, for one, you have to actually have a destination. I think a lot of times we just let the wind blow us by. I remember I got my first VP role at the exact moment I said I'd get it. I was a global manager, which was a senior manager at the time, getting ready to leave this organization I had been at for almost 5 years, getting ready to join this smaller company because I truly believe, well, I'll touch on that later. I'll explain why. But I before I even accepted the offer, I told my wife, I said, I'm going to be a vice president within a year. And I came there and I did that. And it happened exactly in that time frame that I said it would happen, because I had a destination and I knew that along this destination, here are the things that I need to put in place. And I need to have really big wins, and I need to market those wins. A lot of times we all have wins, but it's about how well are you marketing it. Are you telling people that you're actually marketing it? But or that you're actually winning. And if you're not telling anybody you're winning, nobody will ever know. But one big thing that I've learned is, if you look at my career, I will go from a company that has 14,000 employees to a company that has 400. And then I'll go to a company that has 100,000 employees to a company that has 500,000, down to a company that has 3,000. And the reason why is that as you gain these skills and this knowledge, you want to be able to take that to a company that's maybe 2 stages behind where your company is today. So especially if you're in a role where you can help be a decision maker, you want to say, okay, I've been a part of this project. We were able to go from 0 to 80. Let me go to this company that's at 40 right now. And I can help them get from 40 to 80 because I know the blueprint. And every time you take a job, you're learning standard operating procedures, you're learning strategy, you're learning the right moves to make. So whether you're a leader or not, you can take that same skill set and go to the next company. And what's going to happen is they're going to pay you more. They're going to put you in a higher role because you're coming in there as a thought leader and an authority, because you've seen it. You've seen the direction they're already trying to get to.
Mm. What is You Inc?
Yes. So You Inc is each and every one of us. We are our own corporation. You do not work for your company. We are all entrepreneurs, whether we like to admit it or not. That's what we are in today's age. You are a company. You provide services to your employer. So when you think of it from that perspective, you need to start thinking, what are my company goals? Is my company profitable? Is my company being marketed well? What is the brand of my company? When my name is mentioned, how do people think and feel when I'm not in the room? So really, you want to start thinking about yourselves and taking these business principles and saying, if we're going on Shark Tank, how would I pitch myself? How do I put myself in a position where I'm looked at as a valuable asset, a valuable commodity, because that's essentially what you are. You are very specific, you are unique. And along the way, your company is acquiring new products and trade lines. So make sure you're promoting that.
Amazing. And the last thing I want to sort of touch on is where you took all of these experiences and you pivoted them in the tech industry, but
Yeah.
you're still not technical.
No.
How is that possible?
Yeah. I have an entire team of engineers who work under me, who understand code. I've learned some technical things over the years, whether it was doing some soft coding, whether it was a little bit of SQL. And I have a brain for it. But the reality of it is, as a leader, probably the best company I ever worked with that understands leadership really well is Comcast. And what Comcast does, they do something called rounding your cube. And what that means is that as a leader, you could have, let's say, grown in retail. I'm now going to move you to tech ops, where you're outside doing all the landline attachments. And you're doing everything within that organization or within the field. Then I'm going to move you to sales and marketing. Then I'm going to move you over here to engineering. And the reason why is because as a leader, it becomes less about your ability to do the work and more about your ability to see around corners, to remove roadblocks and have strategic direction and vision of where you're going. So really, a company like Comcast, a company like Google, a company like, Netflix, they're looking for leaders who can come in and have a strategic direction and be able to identify the best people on the team for the job. Phil couldn't do what Kobe did. At the end of the day, Steve Kerr can't do what Curry can do. But it's about identifying, how do you take your best players and maximize their talent and figure out how do you create harmony within that team? Not so it's kumbaya, but so that it's running like a machine and you're building momentum. So as a leader, I have a framework. Whenever I come into any corporation, I'm usually going to join a company that needs me to turn it around or build it from scratch, because that's where I get the most equity. And that's also where not just equity from a stock standpoint, but also from a reputation standpoint. Because when you're walking in and you're getting some big wins, people notice you, versus when you're walking in just to kind of keep it status quo. So what I do is I have an 18-month process called iMomentum. And the reason why I call it momentum is because one of my favorite virtual mentors is John Maxwell. He's a leadership expert. And he talks about how if you have a train going 50 miles an hour, it can burst through a 5-foot steel reinforced wall without ever stopping. But that same train, if you have it standing still and you put a 1-inch block at its wheel, it can't even move. And the reason why is because it needs momentum. Momentum is everything. So when you have an organization without momentum, every time a problem happens, everything shuts down. It's chaos, it's unorganized, anxiety, there's stress. With momentum, problems can happen and you take it and you know exactly what to do and you just keep it moving. So my process is, in that first 90 days, a lot of times leaders come in and think I have to have a 90-day plan and I have to be able to, knock it all out the park. That's not what you do in your first 90 days. Your first 90 days is about foundation building. You want to come in there and identify your key roles and responsibilities, your SOPs, your performance cadence, your performance management, your dashboards you're looking at, what are the reports going to be? And that 90 days, getting agreement on what it's going to be. The next 90 days, that's that performance management period where now we know what we're measuring. Let's start having a best practices. I'm start coaching. We're going to start meeting to talk about performance. And we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again without adding anything new. The next 6 months, that's about innovation. What can we do to now streamline some of this work? Do we have any new ideas, any pilot programs? How can we take it to the next level? And that last 6 months, that's the optimization phase. That's where you start figuring out a way to reduce cost and also drive revenue. So can my department help upsell? Can my department bring in some AI so now that we're more efficient? Can we have workflow augmentation? So really within that 18 months, you build an organization that's going to now become boring because it was chaotic when you first got there. but it's so well built and everyone knows what they're supposed to do that they can just continue to build whether you're there or not. And my ultimate goal is to not be needed. I want you to not need me because that's when the doors unlock for me to get promoted.
Amazing. So we're about to wrap up, and I want you to take a second to think about this as we open up for Q&A, guys. If you guys have any questions for Sean, and if this has been useful to you, please go ahead and drop in the chat, order Q&A, how much value you've been getting. Let us know that this was fire, this was amazing. It was really useful to you. And what I want you to think about, Sean, as we take in some of these questions, maybe just boil it down into a kernel of 30 seconds. What advice do you have for people who are watching this, who may be mid-career, looking to pivot, or super early in their cybersecurity career, who might just need that push? What advice do you have for them? Take a second and think about it. All right, it's gonna be a gym. We might even put it on a t-shirt. All right. And while you do that, we're gonna go through some of these questions.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Everyone's saying it's super helpful. Awesome. You guys have any questions for Sean around leadership, around your career? Awesome. Claude asks, how would you advise someone to dive in with intermediate experience, aside from LinkedIn optimization and resume optimization? Claude, could you be a little bit more specific? Does that question make sense? How would you advise someone with intermediate experience aside from LinkedIn and resume?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming he's talking about growth.
I'll give you a second, Claude. Go ahead. Awesome, James. I'm glad you got value. I can wait. I'm glad you got value. Honey, I'm glad you got value. Everyone is just commenting that this is super useful. So that's great. Okay. Claude says, yes, as far as the job and application search.
Oh, yes. So I'm going to give you a real tip. So for one, I love LinkedIn. It's my favorite platform to look for jobs, but I usually don't apply. But I'll tell you my actual strategy of what I use to get jobs. What you want to do is make your profile look as amazing as possible. So make sure you have your nice photo up there. If your photo doesn't look like top quality, use an AI to help you, or use Lightroom as an app to make it look better. Always say if you have an iPhone or a phone that has portrait mode, have someone take your picture, go on the Lightroom app, and it'll actually give it studio quality where it looks like the lighting is really good. But then you also want to have a banner, a nice banner up top that's representing you. Have that banner. I always like to get them off Canva, but not their LinkedIn banners. Instead, I use their LinkedIn dimensions, but I'll grab their YouTube banners. Their YouTube thumbnail banners look so much better. So I would grab one of those so it's more eye-catching. But then your about section is where it gets really important. In your about section, I want you to make sure you're thinking of it like a movie trailer. How do I draw you in? Not just tell you I'm a highly motivated multitasker. That doesn't matter. I want to know your wins, and it doesn't even have to be specific or huge to your industry, but I want to know, where have you been successful? I want to see numbers in there. It could be I worked for a company that was this big, or I've been a part of a market this size, or I've sold this much. You want to have hard numbers in there because it's very attractive. People love numbers. But you also want to have something personal, whether it's, you were a single mom, or whether it's, what adversity, which you've overcome, just finding a way to make yourself become human in that about section. Once your page looks like how it needs to look and you're looking for jobs, what I do is I identify recruiters at all the companies I want to work for. And I will go through and I will search for those companies, and I will filter just for talent, anyone with talent in their name, and I'll make them my friend. Then I'll look for a recruiter and make them my friend. What I'll also really do is I'll look for actually someone who's posting the jobs. They're posting this role. I'll say, okay, this role is hiring for a cybersecurity engineer. Let me go find out who the recruiter is at this company. If I can't find out who the recruiter is at the company, I will friend every recruiter in that company. I won't DM them. I won't apply for the job. What I'll do is, if the recruiter is actually looking for someone, they're going to stumble upon your page. So once you send them a connection request, they're going to say, oh, who is this? They're going to click on your face and say, oh, this is the exact type of talent I'm looking to hire. Now they DM you. If you know anything about the recruiting process, when the company recruits you, you are far more valuable to the company versus you applying to the company. You get put at the top of the list for the interview process. So I always try to get them to come to me versus me going to them.
Awesome. Thank you. Last question. Oh, and Claude also says, love it. Let them judge the book by the cover.
Actually,
All right, Alice, and this is our last question. Alice asked, can you talk more about the concept of rounding the cube to show companies how my diverse background actually makes me the best candidate? Great. Oh, we have
yes.
a ton of questions. I want to respect your time. I just saw a bunch of explosions in here. And by explosions, I mean great questions. I really respect your time, and I know we're at the hour. How much do you have? And I want to make sure we stay there.
You know what? Let's get through every question.
Okay. That doesn't mean ask more, guys.
We'll get through every question tonight. I
Thank
think
you. Thank you again for this time, guys. And I'm glad everyone is taking advantage of having the attention of someone like Sean tonight to actually ask these questions. So thank you guys for being engaged. So back to Alice, can you expand more around rounding the cube?
and let me hit the one, like we skipped one. Let's do the one right before Alice.
Okay.
How would you suggest someone go about finding a mentor? So this one, I think a lot of us want mentors and we're not mentor ready. You have to make sure you're mentor ready. And the way you do that is when you have a mentor, it is not their responsibility to come up with questions to you. It's your responsibility to come to that mentorship conversation with a list of questions ready. And then what you do is after they answer your questions, if they give you any actions to take, you should have action items ready for the next meeting. So when you meet again, you say, here's the progress on what we went over, and here's my new set of questions for you. And of course, you still want to leave room and open room to actually discuss. But the way you find one is know your direction. Where do you want to go? What's that gap you're missing? So a former president of mine, he would call it, you got to create your gumbo. And whenever you're looking at your career profile, we're looking at multiple people. You're like, I'm a culmination of multiple different great leaders, right? It's not just me. So who has the presence I want? Who dresses the way I want? Who presents the way I want to present? And once you identify those people, then you reach out to them and say, hey, would you mind having a coffee chat? I would just love to have a coffee chat with you and learn more about your journey. In that conversation, you'll learn that people who are successful love talking to other people who are actually curious, because my kids don't care, And a lot of us have survivor's remorse and imposter syndrome. And the way we get over it is by pulling up other people. It makes us feel like we've done something with ourselves. So by setting up that coffee chat, whether it's virtual or in person, you'll have the opportunity to be able to, then towards the end of that conversation, you build rapport, say, hey, would you mind if we do this again? You don't even have to call them a mentor. Say, would you mind if we do this again? And just have more questions for them. And then it will happen organically. If you don't know any questions to ask your leader, there's great websites where you're like 100 questions to ask mentors. You can find those out there.
Awesome. That was a great question. And thank you for spotting that too.
No, of course. And back to rounding your cube. So it ties back to what I mentioned earlier. Your career should tell a story. If you were working as a bank teller and you want to get into tech, ideally you should try to get into fintech, because now everything that you've done over the past 10, 15 years in banking applies to this organization, because they need to understand your experience and your skill set. So you have to just find a way to interweave them, because unfortunately, as we do move into new verticals, you're starting from zero unless you can find a way to connect those dots. What I love about cybersecurity is that it applies to every industry we work in, whether you're in the medical field, whether you're in grocery stores, no matter what it is, there's going to be a cybersecurity application. So figure out a way to tell your story so that it now ties back to what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. If I could just sprinkle something on that, one of the things I'm noticing a lot too, just to compliment what Sean said, as I see a lot of healthcare professionals looking to transition as well. And I think you guys are actually perfect candidates for security roles, because you're handling sensitive information, right? You abide by a code and a framework, and it starts with an H. I don't know, you know what it is, right? And you're following these codes. If you're looking at any company that deals with health information, whether it be an insurance company or all the new biotech companies where you send in your samples and they go handle it, they all need to abide by those same rules. And now, what have you done for the last 10 years?
Yeah.
Right? So it's like he said, transitioning that experience that deep subject matter expertise into a new field because they'll need it. You'll stand out way more than the techie who,
Yeah,
doesn't know cyber, but has no context for the world that you come from. So yeah.
perfectly said.
Mhm.
Right. That's the next one.
Of course. So we just answered this. Do you see this fintech question here? It actually sticks out.
Uh, Let me see.
Question.
The one I see next is tips for someone who doesn't necessarily know what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You see that one as well?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I'll answer that one. So, any tips for someone who doesn't necessarily know what they want to do, but they know they want to get into tech and cybersecurity? So, what I'll always like to go back to is what we do is not actually who we are. What I mean by that is that, for example, athletes, they grow up thinking, I'm supposed to be a football player. I've been playing football since I was in the Pee Wee League. And in high school, I was a star. Middle school, I was a star. College, I was, a good player. And I got injured. And now I can't play again. And I don't know what to do with my life because my life's purpose was playing football. That was never your purpose. You need to figure out what are your key attributes that matter to you. What are those key pillars, those key values? Like I said, for me, it was being creative, it was performing, and it was always outperforming myself the next year. So for you, you need to think back to when you were a child. I always say, well, when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up? It could have been a fireman. It could have been anything, right? And then figure out what are those core reasons as to why. What is it? What matters most to you? And then you can apply that to any industry and say, okay, I care most about these three things. For example, if you're really into connecting with people, but you're going to be working in a role in tech that has you siloed, you should not take that role. And I think a lot of times we pick these roles because it sounds sexy or the compensation is great, but it doesn't really line up with who we are. So then you go through school or you take this job and you're miserable. So you want to first identify what matters to you the most before you try to take any job in tech. And then from there, once you know, you can kind of identify if those roles line up with your values. Okay, so I see the fintech one you're saying now from Christian. I work for a fintech company and I've noticed that there are a lot of gaps in their environment, and current manager who will be leaving by the first week of April informed me that he tried to push to have the controls in place, but nothing has been done. What would be the best steps for me to push cross-functional teams to implement what I will ask them to do and have the backup from executives? I love this. This is really good. So I'm teaching a lot of, even my directors that report into me, I'm teaching them this today. Whenever you are talking to anyone outside of your department, you want to equate it to dollars. People understand two things: dollars and customer experience. So if you can be able to and technically employee experience too, but they put that on smaller on the totem pole. But whatever's going on, if you can find a way to say, by us doing this, it's costing this amount of dollars, and you can apply it to those departments and say, this specific department is contributing to this error or this gap, which if we could close this gap would be a net benefit of this dollar amount. Now you have more buy-in, because each year departments get a certain budget and they get and going along with that budget comes initiatives. So if your initiatives are not a part of their roadmap and it's a brand new initiative, they have no incentive to fix it. So you want to identify how can your problem align with the roadmap that they have in their department for the year. And usually it ties back to some form of dollars, or how do we make the experience better, which would drive in more customers and more revenue.
It's an excellent answer. And yeah, Chris, that's how you do it. Tie it all into dollars and cents.
Yeah, it'll make sense after that.
All right, Carlos.
How can I sell myself on LinkedIn as someone transitioning careers with no prior cyber experience? So I mentioned that earlier. It's about telling that story of where you are early in the learning process. Start posting the things that you've learned and make your content engaging, and leave open-ended questions at the end of it so that people want to engage with you in it. You don't have to be an expert. You can come in and say, hey, I just learned this today. This reminds me of when I used to work in the bakery and we had this type of situation. I look at it as meaning this. Hey, what are you all's thoughts on this? And now people will start engaging with that post and saying, oh, actually, this is what it is. Even people in cybersecurity are going to be drawn to you because they're going to see that you're actually interested and intrigued by it. Whereas most people who don't work in cybersecurity don't understand their language, you will. So your post will actually draw them in.
Awesome advice. And I think that's it. So, Sean, I want you to leave us on a good note, brother. What advice do you have
So
watching?
the biggest advice that I can leave you with today is that at the end of the day, none of this matters if you don't take action. You have to really hone in and say, I'm learning, I'm developing myself, I'm building my skills. But if I don't do anything with it, what was the point of doing it? So, and it's not just for you. Think about, who are you doing this for? Who does it impact? Even if you're single and don't have any kids, don't have a partner, there are people in your direct circle and hemisphere that benefit from seeing, witnessing, and being a part of your success. So no matter what you do today, believe in yourself, study. Ultimately, you have to take action.
Thank you. I feel like I found a virtual mentor today. Does anyone else feel like that? Sean, thank you for your time. Thank you for spending and allocating a portion of your evening, your family time with us on a Sunday night. And my wish for this conversation is that it not only blesses the people that were here, but everyone in the world and on the interwebs that is going to be watching this in the future. So without further ado, thank you, Sean, for spending time with us. If you are a member of Symposia, I hope you got a ton of value. And if you're new, I hope this inspired you to seek strategic mentorship and hopefully join our environment. But no matter where you go, follow Sean's advice and apply it.
I appreciate you.
Appreciate you guys. So feel free to hop. If you haven't already, go ahead and go to symposia.com/yourturn. It's actually here in the chat, or scan this QR code if you're by your computer. If you want to speak to an admission specialist, if you haven't already, and talk more about this transition into cybersecurity, we want to help you do that. We want to help you discover what your transferable skills are and help you craft that story. So scan the QR code, go to symposia.com/your-turn. And if you can't, if you haven't already, go to SeanIllenry.com or find Sean on LinkedIn. Sean, just like Sean John, SEAN, Illenry, ILENREY. That's ILENREY on LinkedIn. And same for that website, and connect with Sean as well. He's got a book he wrote on LinkedIn. All the LinkedIn sauce he was drizzling this evening is in that book. Go get Sean's book and connect with him as well. All right. Thanks, man. I'm going to let everyone get some rest.
Thank you. Have a good night, all.
You as well. Have a good one.